that.
Get that.
Done.
Thank you,
All
Georgia.
right. We're at 12. I'm going to start the webinar and probably just leave us here for a minute while people all come in, and then we will kick off. Cool. Good luck, everyone. It's going to be great.
Thanks, Caleb. You're going to make it great. And Gillian and Ray will be sensational.
Exactly.
I love that photo, by the way, Gillian. That's a great one.
All right, I'm hitting start.
Cool. Thanks, Georgia.
It is.
Okay, welcome everyone. We are going to take a brief moment while everybody enters the webinar before we kick off. Great. And I might begin our session today. So thank you to everybody that has registered to attend this webinar to launch Farmers for Climate Action's latest policy roadmap, Energy Sovereignty for Rural Australia, Protecting Farmers, Powering the Future. This is such an exciting session we get to have today with our entire community, alongside the roadmap author, Professor Ray Willis, with farmer Gillian Fennell and Chair of Livestock Australia, and Acting CEO of Farmers for Climate Action, Verity Morgan-Schmidt. My name is Caleb Connor, and I will be the host for today. And before we kick off, I would like to acknowledge that I'm dialing in from Wurundjeri country, and I'd like to pay respects and acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands that we're dialing in from today, pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend my respect to any First Nations folks that have dialed in for the session today. So we have an hour all together, which is incredibly exciting. I want to remind everyone that we are using the webinar feature in Zoom, so we can't see you. We know that you are there, and I would encourage you, if you have questions or would like to make a comment, to use the features, the Q&A feature within Zoom, and we'll be using that later in the webinar as well. How we'll spend the time, I'll briefly introduce the policy roadmap that launched on Tuesday. I'll then hand over to Professor Ray Wills to discuss the policy roadmap, and then over to Farmers for Climate Action CEO Verity to discuss the focus group work and the policy flywheel that is introduced in the paper itself. I'll then hand over to Gillian, who will be speaking to her experience with electrification on farm and her insight from within the sector. And then we'll move to a Q&A with all of our attendees and our guests before jumping into next steps. So in case you missed it, on Tuesday, we launched our latest policy roadmap. It's titled Energy Sovereignty for Regional Australia. Professor Ray, the author of the report, has described it as a practical pathway to an energy secure, productive, and lower cost regional Australia. We are incredibly excited to begin working in a very focused way in this space. And we hope that you have had a chance to either look at the report on our website, or we'll send around a follow-up with a link to downloading the paper after this webinar. Obviously, we have all of the knowledge in the room today to discuss some of the key insights for you. However, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that we had some really incredible input from our entire community of farmers in terms of qualitative input. We ran focus groups, we had policy roundtables, we had farmers stick up their hand to offer insights and quotes and support for the work that we were doing with this piece over the last few months. And the strength and I believe the resonance of this work would not be the same without that level of input. So I would really like to acknowledge all of our farmers that have been available for a conversation, a more in-depth session, and just to offer their experience and wisdom during quite a difficult time, when we also know that everyone is very busy. So thank you so much to everyone that took part. I also, before kicking off, wanted to draw attention to Renee Anderson, who's up in Emerald, and her dog, Miss Maggie, who gave me a lot of joy, and my 18-month-old daughter a lot of joy during this process too. So, to kick us off today, I'm going to hand over to the author of the policy roadmap, Professor Ray Wills. Ray is the managing director of FutureSmart Strategies, and is going to spend some time walking us through the work that he did for this piece. So Ray, I'm going to stop sharing, and you're welcome to bring up your slides now.
Okay, can we see slides? Can we see slides?
Yes, sorry. Yes, we can see slides.
Excellent. Okay. Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I think this is an extraordinarily pivotal time for us thinking about the way that agriculture can be conducted in the future, because it will be bringing new security, new sovereignty to farmers. Let's step into it because we don't have much time. Who would like to be a better surfer? This is what I think is fundamental to this century, is a change in the way that we think. The folks on the right there are participating in the digital economy. The people on top are surfing, and they don't know where they're going because their direction is determined by the digital fingers below it. That applies to us as well. What does the data tell us about how quickly disruptive tech is impacting everything? What does this mean for the future of energy and for farming? Farmers are tied to a global diesel market and they don't control it. We're being told to modernise, but the rule book still looks like last century. It's very difficult to predict anything, especially if it's about the future, according to Niels Bohr's. But today we're going to take a step through. To understand what we're doing, first of all, we need to understand that change is inevitable. Here's a map from 100 years ago. Some would say that Australia does still look a bit like this, but of course, things were measured in miles and the world was different. The thing I'm going to start with today is looking at how quickly things are changing in the energy space and why that's important to us. This is a graph that shows the origin point of energy being generated for more than 100 terawatt hours in a year. Now, that's a bucket load of energy. That's an awful lot of energy. That's an energy that sort of powers nations and multiple nations. And here we go. We've got growth curves for all manner of things. The brown is coal. The dark blue is hydro. The purple is gas. The brown is oil. We used to burn oil for making electricity. We're doing less and less than that today. But when we first started in the 50s, it was really grew quickly until we got to the fuel crisis of the 1970s, and that's when that line bent. You can also see that nuclear grew really quickly when we started building it, and it grew quickly, but it actually started to slow down because we've reached a peak of how many nuclear plants the world was prepared to build. Then you can see the lighter blue curve of wind rising very quickly, and in the history of wind for the last 35 years, it hasn't slowed down. For the history of solar, you can see that the history of solar is even faster. When it first emerged around about 12 years ago, of more than 100 terawatt hours, it grew really quickly, and it continues to grow quickly today. You can see that line is not slowing down. It's still pointing upwards. It's still growing faster, and faster than any other energy form we've ever had has grown. And then down in the bottom little corner there is a little red bar poking its head up, and that's battery dispatch. Batteries don't make energy. They harvest and store energy and send it out again. But the critical thing here is that is growing awesomely fast. It's coming onto scene as over 100 terawatt hours of dispatch only in the last couple of years. That's why the bar is so short. And accompanying that is the fall in price of energy, and the fall in price in particular of solar. Solar is now the world's cheapest way to make energy. And all this graph shows is that from the history of solar being really expensive in 1976 to really cheap in 2025, it's persistently fallen at more or less the same rate. Except that if you look to the right of the graph, the dots since 2020 are going even faster. And that's why that line is on the previous graph was still pointing to the sky. Batteries are also coming. They're coming really quickly. Batteries are not quite comparable in price to solar panels in terms of the unit cost, because they do a different thing. But you can see here that batteries are following that same trend line down into our currency of 2025. This is really important because if we think about the way that things build, this is an example of solar being installed in Australia. The importance of this graph to us, though, is that first of all, the bottom yellow line is all the small stuff, less than 2.5 kilowatts. We didn't put in very much. And then we graduated and actually solar started to become bigger, and more solar as it was installed was bigger and bigger. This is going to apply to us as well in terms of our electrification. The more we do, the bigger it will get, and the bigger it gets, the bigger it's capable of getting. You can also see from this graph that it wasn't until 2018 that we first substantially started installing solar farms in Australia. Before that, it was mostly rooftop. And here's a thought: farmers utilise sunshine to grow crops. We know sunshine better than anybody. If we look forward going to the future and we start adding all that together, then from 2025, we're already seeing the growth, but the growth is getting faster. And so what we will see is the brown lines coming down, which is the fossil fuels, the purple lines coming down, which is gas. Even the red lines are coming down for nuclear, but all the other lines, which are green and yellow and blue, all the renewables are all growing. And growing the fastest is solar, and growing faster than solar is battery dispatch. All of this stuff is importantly coming from one place. We need to think about China, but this is a conversation for question time. But all this graph shows is that the majority of the world's clean tech comes from China. And in the middle there, you'll see mention of electric vehicles. You'll also see mention of heavy-duty vehicles, electric trucks. 90% of the world's electric trucks that are available today are coming from China. So we need to think about this as we move forward. In Australia, this change is happening fast too. We can see here a graph that shows all of the energy coming into Australia's energy generation systems, and you can see that it's rapidly changing and it's actually getting faster. So what does that mean for us? It means that machinery, when we can get it affordably, will be electric. And indeed, there's an awful lot of working machines. As you can see, these are real machines. There's no AI on this screen. And you can see, of course, the scourer on the right, which is an electric vehicle doing work. And this is a shot from the USA from about 2 years ago. So what does all this mean? This is really important to understand. Why is it that we're here? And the challenge for us is that we're facing this diesel dependence, and that diesel dependence gives us the blue line in the top right corner there, shows us the price of oil over time. Whenever there's a crisis, the oil price goes up, and the first peak in this latest series was in fact the Ukraine war, and now the Iranian crisis has actually just really returned oil back to where it was during the Ukraine war. Agriculture should not be punished for today's diesel use because of things that are dropping in out of the skies over Iran. We need to be able to move beyond that. Electrification is the future of most land-based machinery. And guess what? We farm on the land, so that's where the machinery will be used. The job of policy is to make lower costs that I've described and the lower risk options that I will describe to be the commercially the rational ones that we want to do. This is a resilience and productivity story first, and it also cuts our emissions if we do it, but we'll do it with cheaper energy. Now, here's a shopping list of statements I'm just going to quickly go through because I have a limited amount of time. Electrification is the single biggest opportunity to structurally lower energy costs and improve sovereignty in modern Australian farming. Why now? Because I've described we're witnessing the fastest energy shift in history. Electric systems need less energy to do the same useful work, and it's cheaper to power. And when paired with local renewables, it's cheaper again. The practical sequence: electrify stationary and short-range jobs first. Just like the solar panels grew bigger and bigger, so too will do the jobs that we do. Will start small and get bigger, progressively to heavier mobile plant as products mature. Sustainable biofuels remain important as a bridge and for genuinely hard to electrify and legacy uses, but they do not bring the major cost savings. This is the critical thing. They don't bring the major cost savings that we'll get from structural electrification. This is about choosing a better cost structure for the next 20 to 30 years, not just the next season. If we think about it broadly, why does solar bring so much power to land? Here's a quick comparator, and it has to be quick because I don't have much time. So if we put a hectare of solar panels out, there's about 600 kilowatts. We'll make between 1,000 and 1,500 megawatt hours of electricity a year from those solar panels, depending on where you are in Australia. If you're further south, it'll be 1,000 kilometres. If you're further north, it'll be 1,000 megawatt hours. If you're further north, it'll be 1,500 megawatt hours. This is more than 100 times the amount of energy that you'll get from 1 hectare of planted soybean crop. If you turn a hectare of soybean crop into biofuels, you'll harvest about 8.3 megawatt hours a year. This is a phenomenal difference. And this is why using electricity from solar as we can do it is going to be so important. If you're up Queensland way, you're going to get sugarcane outputs really, really good, about 5 times the amount of what you'd get from soybean crop. But it's still only 1/25th of the amount you get from solar panels. Farmers can use sunshine to grow their farm. Isn't that marvellous? Let's keep moving. I've got to keep this running on. The energy needed for a 6,000 hectare crop, if you're going to go out and do 35 days of seeding, you're going to use about 30,000 litres of diesel. And that seems really like a lot of energy, and it is. It's about 320 megawatt hours of fuel if you turn it into electricity equivalents. And the question is, can you even do that with an electric tractor? Isn't that too big? And the actual point is, well, no. First of all, electric tractors are far more efficient, so they don't need the same level of energy that you need in diesel. And so therefore what you see is about 1/3 of the amount of energy is required as a source, and that's because of all the thermal inefficiencies that are associated with the combustion engine. An electric tractor uses 3.1 megs a day. With 1 hectare of solar plus 2.5 megs of batteries, you've actually already got it covered. Just 1 hectare of solar. Farmers can use sunshine to grow everything. Isn't that a phenomenal thought? Let's keep going. Otherwise, I'm going to waffle on too much. How the shift unfolds, and Verity will cover some more of this. But first of all, we're going to step through that we electrify what's easy: sheds, refrigeration, pumps, irrigation controls, local processing, and yes, getting into light and medium vehicles now because they're available. Many farmers are already doing this. In the next 5 years, we need to replace smaller and shorter duty machines with the electric options as they reach end of life, sending the old stock away and getting the new products where they exist. But it is my advice that by the 2030s, much of the heavier machinery that we need and the longer haul transport that we're already seeing on roads on the East Coast and in Western Australia will be commercial. We're moving through that. We've really got to do that. Throughout this process, the use of sustainable biofuels are a bridge for existing tractors, harvesters and remote operations, and that's great news. But in parallel, we'll build regional energy systems on farms. We'll have solar and batteries and microgrids, and we'll hear more about that as well, to permanently lower exposure to volatile fuel markets. This is not about every vehicle or tractor being electric tomorrow. It's about us stepping through and deciding to make change and then making use of the change that's available. Beyond electrification, here's another shopping list. We can see regions being built locally as renewable energy systems that integrate with the community and that bring new options for new solutions like green ammonia for fertiliser resilience. Instead of having to import ammonia from elsewhere, we should be able to do this regionally with small modular reactors for ammonia. Energy sovereign regions can also be better can better measure and monetize natural capital as part of farm performance, not just compliance. And then taken together, these beyond electrification opportunities point to the next horizon for the agenda that we have. Energy inputs and natural capital working together to underpin farm resilience and, can I add, profitability. But the near-term priority is clear. Accelerate electrification, do it as we can, reform fuel tax settings, and use public finance to get the flywheel spinning, which is where I'll hand over to Verity in just a second. Diesel dependence is a vulnerability. Energy sovereignty is the opportunity. Now, just a few quick slides just to show you these things like heavy trucks. They already exist. They're already available. The photo in the top left is in Western Australia. The photo in the middle is from Germany. The photo on the right is from the East Coast Australia. The photo of Maersk is out of the ports in Melbourne. Melbourne or Sydney, Melbourne, one of those two big capitals. And the one on the right, you might guess, that one's from China. That's showing a battery pack swap for a truck, which is the same thing that Janus does in the top right. The world's going to be surprising when you go out to walk your dog. It might not be the dog that you're used to. And we'll see this electrification happen right across different industries and sectors, and we can see it here. We can also see it happening in the air right now. And in a few years' time, we expect passenger jets, passenger planes to be flying short distance flights in Canada and New Zealand. All have already ordered their planes for services in 2028, 2029. Okay, I had to finish with a farm joke. That's me done. I'll hand back as soon as I get to my last slide. Don't fight the inevitable. Okay, thank you. I will quit that and
Resistance is futile. Love that, Ray.
Give the screen back. Now, have I done that, or have I? Yes.
You've successfully done that. I've taken back control. Resistance is futile. Professor Ray Wills. For anyone that's found some of Ray's points interesting or compelling, the roadmap he's authored goes into a lot more detail, and there's some great reading in there. I'll also encourage, I'm seeing some really excellent questions come through the Q&A, so thank you so much for using that. Please load us up with your questions as we go, and during the Q&A, I'll start directing those to our panelists today. But we'll keep moving on. I'd like to introduce the acting CEO of Farmers for Climate Action, Verity Morgan-Schmidt. I'll hand over to Verity to start speaking about the work that we've done behind the scenes and some of the main parts of the paper about recommendations and where we go next.
Thank you, Caleb, and thank you, Ray, for that fantastic scene setter and your incredible work in pulling this roadmap together. I'm sure many on the webinar today will also have appreciated the detail and the depth that the roadmap really goes into in terms of examining what this can potentially look like. For those who are new to Farmers for Climate Action, I might just quickly do a scene setter. So Farmers for Climate Action has been around for nearly a decade now. We're a movement of around 8,500 farmers right across the country with a broader community support base of around 80,000 of our friends in regional towns and urban areas as well. Farmers for Climate Action is one of those unusual organisations that really focuses on bridging that distance between the rural-urban divide that we so often talk about in agricultural circles. And so a big part of what we do is really being able to showcase and tell farmer stories around what the opportunities of the future really look like. What do solutions, what do pathways forward look like for our incredible industry that we should all be so proud of? So our position, our starting point, is that Australia's agricultural sector really underpins regional employment, supply chain, industries, export earnings, and domestic food security. Strengthening farm profitability, and Ray, of course, anything that you're speaking at for FCA, please mention profitability, but strengthening farm profitability, resilience and competitiveness while restoring our natural systems and accelerating that economy-wide decarbonisation is therefore, from our perspective, not only an agricultural priority, but a matter of national economic security and sovereign capability. And it's within that context that we actually bring this report to you and this roadmap to you today. Our vision is really for Australia to be a global leader on climate solutions with those profitable farms. It all comes back to being able to keep farmers farming, restored natural capital, and resilient regions that underpin our long-term national food and energy security. Now, The way that we have approached this challenge is to really ground this in the compounding systemic challenges that are facing our industry. Some of you on the call today might be familiar with the work that AgriFutures has been leading on over the last few months as well, which identifies 6 compounding challenges that are facing our agricultural sector. Those challenges are climate change and environmental resilience, energy transition and emissions, water security and drought, supply chain resilience and food security, trade and geopolitical dynamics, workforce and regional communities. I'm really proud to be able to acknowledge that our roadmap, our Energy Sovereignty for Regional Australia roadmap, goes directly to the heart of 3 of those challenges, being climate change and environmental resilience, energy transition and emissions, and of course, supply chain resilience, because that's what it's all about at the end of the day. Now, we present this report in many ways as being the conversation starter. How do we go about doing this systemic shift that needs to occur for our sector? How do we actually unlock the potential that electrification actually enables for a sovereign, for a really resilient sector well into the future, regardless of the compounding challenges we might be facing throughout our supply chain? So with that as our starting premise, I'll just quickly talk you through some of the work that we did. Now, as I mentioned, Farmers for Climate Action has a significant network of farmers right across the country. We're incredibly privileged to be able to call across farmers in our network who might range from the Atherton tablelands through to cotton growing regions in New South Wales and Queensland, right the way over to broadacre producers here in Western Australia, where I'm joining you from today. Now, the first step that we undertook in developing this report was actually to reach out to our own farmers. What is it that we're hearing? What are the risks? What are the challenges? What are you facing as we have this significant disruption to our supply chains around fuel and fertiliser? We did deep listening exercises, pulling together an internal focus group before we even started looking to the outer. What mattered to our farmers on the ground? What we found was that right across the industries, regardless of whether they were speaking to us from Queensland or whether they were speaking to us from Western Australia or Tasmania, farmers were deeply concerned about the risks that supply chains for the fuel industry and our diesel-dependent sector were actually presenting. So, of course, this formed the basis for starting to explore this bit of work. How do we take those farmer concerns? Now, you've got a slide up on your screens at the moment, which is where we went from talking to our own farmers within our networks across the country to actually going, well, realistically, at the end of the day, we need to understand what matters to the farmers who may not be speaking directly to us. Those farmers that may, at this point in time, although I hope they join us in the future, sit outside our existing networks. And so this is exactly the work that we then went and undertook. For us, it's all about really understanding our industry, making sure that we're ground truthing the work that we do and the policy proposals that we're exploring. So we went and commissioned independent research to really understand that farmer sentiment. We hosted a focus group of 12 farmers, a range of sectors with a real focus on those mid to large size. So those that are really the most vulnerable to these supply chain disruptions and ongoing diesel dependence. What we found was really fascinating. The inequality that is felt between mining and agriculture came out very strongly as part of the sentiment within that focus group testing. We found that farmers were feeling that it really just came down to money. It came down to mining being able to have more availability to tell the story than what agriculture does, more to throw at parties and parties being more interested in where money comes from. The farmers just not having enough cash to splash around and therefore feeling like the forgotten ones. What we found was really interesting, and I'll go to our technology flywheel in a moment, but what we found was really interesting was that historically, some of these bigger pieces of work that we're talking about within this report, for example, a cap in relation to the fuel tax credit scheme, we found that farmers overwhelmingly were really keen to ensure that tax money was spent in a way that actually builds out energy sovereignty for rural and regional Australia and for our nation as a whole as a long term. So it wasn't just about maintaining that long-term diesel dependence. It was about absolutely protecting our sector, making sure that those who produce the food and fibre that we are so proud to grow here and enjoy here and, of course, export to the world, making sure that those farmers and associated industries were protected, but also recognising that realistically, at the end of the day, we need to have fuel tax systems and we need to have taxation systems more broadly that actually really underpin energy security, national security and food security, of course, at the end of the day. There was deep recognition across our farmers and across these farmer focus groups around the country that really showed that at the end of the day, what farmers want is to be able to move forward into the future, to look after their farm businesses, to make sure that they're able to continue to produce that food and fibre, and also recognising that there is a significant significant opportunity there for those with the greatest capacity to be able to accelerate change, to really be unlocking that change. We need to see that acceleration occurring. So when we start to look at our technology flywheel, and this is probably my favourite graphic in the report, and maybe even my favourite graphic in the slide, although Renee's dog, pretty cute. Caleb, I will give you points for including a dog. I think we should have a dog in pretty much every presentation that we do. So I'll just draw everyone's attention in the first instance to page 13 on our roadmap, which really points to how do we actually get this shift to start occurring. We need to recognise that each of these changes are not just linear steps that should be happening in isolation. What we want to do is actually accelerate that progress, because as we have seen over the last 6 months, Australian agriculture's diesel dependence is a significant point of vulnerability. But more broadly, our diesel dependence as a nation is actually a significant challenge for our long-term security. We need to find ways that actually accelerate that pathway towards energy sovereignty and energy security using clean green energy made right here at home and working for our farmers and for our regional communities. So I point you to the first component of our flywheel, and this is all about how do we get that pace of change happening? How do we actually get tax architecture that facilitates and underpins that scale of change? And for us, this is recognising that there is significant potential via the fuel tax credit scheme to assist in providing that rapid acceleration of our flywheel. The second component, of course, is to back Australian commercialisation and manufacturing. At the end of the day, we're talking about energy sovereignty here. We need to be really, really clear that we're actually trying to build out our national capability in this regard as well. We want to be using clean energy from the sun generated right here in Australia. We want to be backing innovative Australian companies, like, for example, EVworks, who joined us at the launch on Tuesday, to showcase some of the innovation with manufacturing and technological solutions that are made right here at home, providing local employment and actually delivering solutions that are perfectly tailored for the Australian market. The next thing that we need to do is to really be able to investing in that regional enabling infrastructure. Now, I don't know about all of you on the call because I can't see your faces, but if you're anything like me and you live in rural and regional Australia and you travel significantly across rural and regional Australia, we don't always have the enabling infrastructure to allow us to be able to take up the technology that is there today. To get that flywheel spinning faster, we need to make sure that we're building out that capability at the same time. We cannot be putting forward proposals that farmers are unable to access because the enabling infrastructure isn't in place. We need to make sure that our existing institutions are actually enabling the acceleration of that process. The fourth component of our flywheel, which I'll point you to, and I'll also commend to you a report released by AgriFutures yesterday, which incidentally goes almost to the heart of some of these challenges as well, is modernising the tax and their regulatory settings to support the diversified farm business models that we are actually developing and experiencing and enjoying here today. And I'll just point you to the words of Brianna Casey, the amazing CEO over at AgriFutures, who tells us that agriculture is changing, but policy settings around it haven't shifted in step. Producers are diversifying into new income streams to manage risk, deal with seasonal volatility, and build long-term stability. But when the tax system doesn't clearly recognise those activities, it can create uncertainty and financial disadvantage. The component that I would add to that is also that farmers are identifying opportunities that they wish to leap forward into as well. They're really seeing what do these pathways through carbon markets, biodiversity markets, and of course electrification, whether that be on farm or whether that be hosting generation for other consumption. Farmers are really looking at these opportunities and they're saying, how do we actually make sure that we have a tax and a regulatory setting that enables us to keep up? And so I commend to you the report that came out from AgriFutures yesterday, because it speaks directly again to some of the components of our flywheel, which left me extremely excited to see that coming through. The final element of this flywheel, recognizing that at all of these steps, they're compounding. We're trying to bring these pieces of the puzzle together. We're trying to make sure that for each innovation, for each farmer that chooses to go down this path, for each community that wishes to access these opportunities of the future, what we need to see is that it's easier for each farmer than it was for the farmer that preceded that. This is what the technology flywheel is all about. It's about getting the settings right to be able to accelerate those processes. And this is where the final step goes to demonstration, de-risking, and training. How do we actually make sure that we have real live examples out and about for farmers to look at? We know that farmers are phenomenally innovators. I was chatting just on Tuesday to a company that is currently supplying drones and electrifying drones and providing that energy support in the paddock to go in and actually slash saplings, which is just amazing, poor little suckers as they're coming up. Extraordinary innovation that is unfolding all around the country on farms from Carnamah all the way to Cape York. Farmers are leading the way on innovation, but we need to make sure that we are providing those demonstration sites. We need to make sure. Oh no, Caleb, we might have the wrong screen up. Someone's working. Oh, hold on. We've just got some comments in the chat. I'll keep going while we sort out the tech in the background. There we go. Thanks, Caleb. It might have dropped out for a moment. Thank you for flagging for us, Monica. I appreciate that. We need to make sure that farmers are able to see examples of this working as well. Some of you will be familiar with the phenomenal work that the Zero Net Emissions Ag CRC is rolling out across the country in relation to their producer demonstration sites. There are examples of how demonstration opportunities for farmers can really help to be able to accelerate that pace of change. I think Gillian in a moment might also talk to you about the importance of making sure that the regulatory framework and the settings around the practitioners who are able to provide connection or those who are able to actually support the installation of electrification infrastructure need to be right for a rural and regional setting. Because of course we know what is needed, for example, out the back of Perenjori or what is needed out the back of Broken Hill is going to be vastly different to what works within an urban environment. So in a nutshell, our technology flywheel is all about accelerating that pace of change. We know that this shift is over a long term inevitable. We know that electrification, decarbonisation is actually a significant opportunity to build out energy security and energy sovereignty for rural and regional Australia. And most importantly, we know that this is a path that is of real interest to Australian farmers. The opportunity is here, and this roadmap is a pathway for us to be able to seize it. Caleb, I'll hand back to you to go to Gillian.
Thank you so much, Verity. I promised everyone on the line that I was not sending emails, but I'm glad that one was clarified in the end. Thank you again, Verity. I'd love to hand over now. Gillian Fennell has very kindly joined us for our session today. Gillian is a farmer on Lambina Station and the chair of Livestock South Australia. And we'll hand over to you, Gillian.
Thank you very much, Caleb. So, hi everyone. Some of you will probably already know me. For those who don't, I'll give you a brief overview of where we live and where we do business. So we've got a 1 million acre cattle station where we run about 5,000 head of cattle, give or take, located approximately 300 kilometres north of Cooperative or 500 kilometres south of Alice Springs. So they're right in the top edge of South Australia there. We've never been on grid. We've never had the ability to have access to like town power, I guess, as long as the station has been in existence. And we've been there for about 25 years. So when I first moved there 25 years ago, we were running everything off a diesel generator, which meant that when the diesel generator went off, there was no electricity, there was no water, there was no telephone. So we relied on a CB radio for emergencies and those sorts of things. So we fast forward a few years and we didn't really enjoy that lifestyle very much. I know I didn't enjoy it, having to have everything done by the time the generator went off in night, because we didn't run it overnight, regardless of how hot it was. And when I had kids, that really sort of came home to me that that's not a great idea. So we used to have a 35 kVA generator, which would run for an average of 17 hours a day at 3.8 litres per hour supplying, and that supplied 2 households and a workshop, a cold room and water pressure pump to keep the water circulating around the homestead. And we had more than 12 diesel water pumps across the property. So they were a combination of little tiny gen sets or big mono pumps. And at peak, we were consuming around 110,000 litres of diesel per year. So we decided, we sat down with a pencil and paper and decided what would be the most efficient, effective way to not spend so much money on diesel, because for us, this was a purely economic decision. So we moved to a RAPS unit, remote area power system unit, and we received a grant from the government that would help install this in the first instance. It did go nowhere near towards the cost of the installation or the purchase of the materials. Oh, look, there's one of our solar pump installations there out on the station. Very neat and tidy work that we've done there. So we moved to a single 5 kVA solar setup with flooded lead acid batteries, so like a car battery but supersize. And we had a 20-foot shipping container full of lead acid batteries that required to be topped up with distilled water because of the temperatures that they're operating at, et cetera, et cetera. So that was really difficult for maintenance, and it was also really challenging because it did not provide enough storage or enough power to power what we needed it to power. And we still did have to run the generator for around 6 hours a day to charge those batteries up so they would last overnight. So that was about 4.5 litres an hour because it's running at a higher input to charge those batteries up, because that was in addition to the solar panels that we had. So then we went through our second upgrade, which moved us through a 3-phase microgrid. So Joe, you asked if there was anyone doing this like an enterprise scale. So we essentially have our own power system, like you would find in a urban setting. We're a microgrid. We generate all our own power. We store all our own electricity on batteries, and all of our different workshops, houses, and additional buildings are all powered off that microgrid. So we had to re-cable the entire station to do that, like the homestead complex. So that was a bit of a pain and also quite expensive as well. But we installed 60 lots of 275 watt panels, which gave us 16.5 kilowatts in total, which was paired with 6 battery units that are managed by Sunny Isla inverters. So we moved from a whole 20-foot shipping container full of batteries to 6 units that are approximately the size of a bar fridge. And that's the amazing thing about solar technology that we've found. Panel technology and battery technology especially is gradual, like it is exploding in its complexity, but also in its capacity, and also it is getting much smaller and easier to manage all the time. So that was a really good thing. So generator hours have dropped away. We only run our generator now for about 50 hours per month, because when there is a high demand, for example, if we're doing a lot of welding or a lot of those sorts of things in the workshop, or if it's cloudy or overcast for a period of time, we do need to run the diesel generator back up to make sure that the batteries remain charged. So we also have more demand on the microgrid than what we used to have. We now have 3 full households, a single man's quarters, the workshop, everything runs off 3-phase, a cold room, and the water pressure pumps as well. So we've reduced the size of our batteries, increased the size of our panels, but also increased the amount of electricity that we can generate and store. So, and because panel technology is moving so quickly and they're coming down in price all the time, we'll be able to replace those existing panels with 400 to 440 kilowatt panels, because we now operate at a microgrid as well. Any flat surface you can find in that homestead complex, we will be able to put panels on any roof, especially our big sheds, because at the moment they're just blank empty space, keeps it off the ground, and put inverters in each building, and we will be able to hook everything together. So it's just the capacity to generate more and more and more, and as we can afford to purchase more batteries, all those sorts of things, we can store more and more and more. So beyond our main sort of homestead complex where we needed to generate electricity to live, we have also replaced 12 of our diesel pumps with solar powered pumps, and we still have one that still has to run off a diesel generator, and that is because it is exceptionally deep. We don't have the capacity for the amount of panels that will require to power that pump. Technically it can be done, we just can't afford to buy that many panels at the moment. And we also, because we're always thinking about saving money and saving diesel, we installed a remote telemetry camera system, which cut out a full, there's another one of our solar pump installations. We did that one for a neighbour, actually. That's not ours, but we did build and install that. So, yeah, because that's our home, our house. That's what generates all the power for our house. That's the solar panel system. And you can see underneath there's a shipping container, which is where the batteries live. So yeah, it is doable. But yeah, as was alluded to before, there are a lot of barriers to this type of adoption, especially in the more remote areas. So it is a challenge to access the necessary skills, and also a lot of the schemes that are targeted at urban people to take up renewable energy and battery storage, like the installation of batteries, they come with a thing called a clean energy credit. If you do a self-install of any sort of renewable energy equipment, you don't get those credits. Those credits just disappear. So you're being punished financially because of where you live. And especially with solar water pumps and those sorts of things, they're very, very low voltage. You can literally plug and play them off the shelf, and many people do. You can install them yourself, and many people have. And it's those sorts of barriers that are sort of restricting uptake of this better, more, this technology, because we don't have the expertise in the regions required. For another example, we have another farm in the Flinders Ranges where we received a grant from the federal government to install some solar energy generation and battery storage. There are only 2 accredited installers in the entirety of South Australia, and so we could not get them in time to meet the deadlines and the contract requirements. So that was a project that didn't go ahead because we couldn't do it ourselves. That would have breached our contract, and we did not get access to that funding from the government to do that project. So there are policy levers that government can pull to drive uptake of these types of technologies. And, it's not just all about saving the environment. It will save you a lot of money. So our annual diesel consumption now sits at around 35 to 55,000 litres a year, depending on whether we're earth moving or not. And that's a reduction of between 50 to 68% from our peak. And that is running more cattle with more water points, with more people living there. And recently, when the Strait of Hormuz kicked off and everyone was scrambling for diesel, we in the north of South Australia just had some really big rains, so our diesel deliveries had been delayed. We were one of the lucky stations where we still had diesel in our tank, and we did not need to order additional diesel, and we got through that really high price, really volatile period of time because we had diesel in our tank, enough to get us through, and we did not have to rely on diesel for day-to-day generation. We could save it for vehicle operations. So it does give you a buffer against things that you cannot sort of plan for, because these sorts of things, as we are seeing, are becoming more and more frequent and more severe in their intensity and price impacts. So for me and for us, it's just a good business decision to make us less vulnerable and less reliant on someone else. We'd like to do everything ourselves, and that's just how we like to work. So yeah, that's what we've been doing.
Incredible. Thank you, Gillian. I'd like to immediately ask you a question that's come through in the chat on whether you've had any issues with your batteries in the heat.
Yeah, so when we had the lead acid batteries, that was a massive problem with the heat, because ground temperature can get up to about 70 degrees in the summer. So they do all the batteries live in an additional shipping container behind those solar panels. So it is in the shade all the time, because obviously those panels are north facing, so they catch the most sun. And because we now have 24/7 power, there's a very small air conditioner that lives in there. And we've insulated the shipping container, and it keeps everything cool. We keep the doors shut. Obviously, you don't just leave it open to the heat and those sorts of things. So we have found a way to mitigate that. But the lithium ion batteries run a lot cooler than the lead acids did. And there's not that risk of the lead acids used to boil and literally explode. We have not had that issue with the lithium ions, because even though they look like a bar fridge, you have to physically open them up, and they sit inside in little racks and are all sort of plugged together. So it's like a box in a box in a box. So they are quite safe. I wouldn't have one in the center of my lounge room, obviously, because you're talking about a lot of potential energy stored in there. But if you're worried about sort of fire concerns or those sorts of things, there's, you keep them cool, you make sure you keep up on your maintenance. And because they're getting much smarter, and now we all have access to a Starlink, they do a lot of digital monitoring, and you will get an alert on your phone to tell you if something is going wrong with that power system. And we've implemented things where we can turn off pumps virtually by our phones because of the combination of the 24-hour power, the microgrid, and the Wi-Fi connectivity. So we can monitor and manage all of those sorts of things. And if it does go down, you have to have a fair bit of technical expertise, which is my husband's department. Without him, we wouldn't have been able to do any of this. But yeah, it is doable and manageable. And that comes back to the flywheel, where we need to invest in the skills and technology. It would be a lot easier if farming was recognised as a trade. It could just be a plug-in module to your trade, because it happens for other trades as well. Like mechanics can get a plug-in module to go and learn about working on EVs. So why can't farmers do that to learn how to put in solar pumps and then have access to those clean energy credits and those sorts of things? Like it's all doable if government had the will to implement these things.
Great. Thanks, Gillian. I am reminding everyone that we're now formally in our Q&A. So people are making use of the Q&A feature. Please pop your questions in there. I'm going to throw one to Ray that came through a little bit earlier on the timeframes and how that relates to the different pathways forward, given that the fuel crisis and that electrification being a real game changer is still some time away at scale. The question is, shouldn't we focus now on producing our own low carbon liquid fuels on farm in the meantime? So Ray, do you want to take that question and add any thoughts? I know this has been a huge point for us to balance as we've thought about this piece of work.
Yeah, so we haven't scaled up biofuels. We don't have the kit on the farm. If we're going to scale up biofuels, we need to put the kit on the farm. If we scale up solar and electricity, we need to put the kit on the farm. Which dollars are we going to spend? So do we spend money on biofuels now for the next 5 years, or do we spend money on electrification now for the next 30 years? Now, clearly you can make a choice to go the more comfortable path because, hey, yeah, we've got machines on farm that are burning liquids. And so therefore it's actually seems logical to go, oh, let's go and burn these other liquids which are less harmful than the diesel. And that's absolutely true. But we're going to, for most farmers who do not yet have that capability of generating biofuels on the farm, they're going to need to put the stock on. If you're buying biofuels from off the farm and it's from a supplier, you're going to sell your crop to them for a crop price, and then you're going to buy back a liquid fuel price. And there will be some saving there because I've seen some suggestions of 70 cents a litre in the questions there, which I haven't been able to get back to answer. But this is too long an answer. I need to make it shorter. So the short answer is that the cost of liquids is still going to be higher. The cost of electricity is absolutely going to be lower. And I gave that slide during my presentation of why that's the case. Electricity gets produced in so much greater quantity from a solar panel than you can get than you can get energy from a plant, unfortunately.
Great. Thank you, Ray. I would like to throw another question to Gillian. I see you've turned your video off. I hope that means I'm not interrupting her. Now, the question I was going to ask, it's from Janet, who asked, are there any states or territories providing support, including financial support for the electrification of the industry? Maybe let's generalize that. Gillian, what support have you found for the work that you've done? And also what barriers have there been to that work too?
Yeah, so there are some grants available to replace diesel infrastructure with solar infrastructure, primarily around large like water pumping and those sorts of things. But again, the barriers come in when you have to use an accredited installer to install those types of things, and you cannot access them. And that's the further away from an urban centre, the more that's going to become a massive issue, because by the time you actually sort of pay someone to travel to that location and do that work, the grant doesn't go towards any sort of purchase of the capital equipment or anything like that. So it makes it irrelevant. You may as well just keep the capital equipment that you have and keep putting diesel in it, because there's no real benefit to your bottom line. So all those sorts of things need to be considered. And it is, it's not, I don't think it's that hard really to get around, because you're talking about, especially if you're not talking about household electricity, like if you're talking about commercial, agricultural, where you're going to pump, it's a large solar installation to drive a large water pump to, say, water fruit trees or water livestock or those sorts of things. The general risk is much, much reduced because you're not living there. It's not accessible to the general public. There needs to be a look at the regulatory frameworks around these types of installations and who can carry them out, under what circumstances. Is there a thing where you just have to be signed off by one accredited person who checks your work, basically, and anyone can sort of install that infrastructure, but before it's commissioned, it is inspected like a building inspector. All these types of things can be done. I just don't think anyone's given it any great deal of attention, because there's not a lot of us. There's not a lot of farmers, so we're not very high up in the priority list of finding easy pathways. And it's not about giving us more money. A lot of these things that will drive adoption is about removing barriers and removing unnecessary regulatory burden that will make it easier for us to access these technologies, because they do make economic sense in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that's excellent, Gillian. And I would really encourage, I have learned a lot meeting and sharing with Gillian in the last couple of weeks on some of those key barriers and making the job easier and not harder. And I would really encourage, if there is anyone on the call today who has experienced similar or other roadblocks to getting a job done like that, like, please be in touch. This is exactly the kind of work that we'd like to inform our advocacy in this space in the future. So yeah, please get in touch if this resonates. I want to throw a question to Verity to just maybe go over again the point that the top of the flywheel for this piece of work is reforming the fuel tax architecture and the fuel tax credit scheme. I just want to give you, Verity, another opportunity to kind of touch on that piece and why this scheme, why now, what's the opportunity for agriculture to really focus in on this in this moment.
Thanks so much for that, Caleb. And I think the reality is, as I mentioned before, this is all about how do we accelerate that pace of change, and also how do we make sure that FTCS remains available and sustainable for farmers into the long term as well. So at the end of the day, what we're trying to achieve is a scheme that is able to underpin and support and make sure that our sector is still able to access it without, this unprecedented exploding budget line item that is currently occurring. At the end of the day, those with the biggest capacity to actually make the shift, which is where, a cap of 50 million into the FTCS would actually encourage rather than disincentivize those who have the capacity to accelerate that shift, is so important to provide those right market signals while making sure that we look after farmers on the way through. This is all about how do we make sure that technology flywheel is able to be accelerated in a way that looks after farmers. I will just quickly as well, Caleb, just touch on a couple of the questions that were raised there. I can see coming up in the Q&A, and I'm just cognizant of time. There were some questions around the existing policy infrastructure that sits there, and I think, Belinda, it might have come from you. The policy gap. So I'll just draw your attention to the roadmap itself as well, because of course we see a cap on the FTCS as being a way to actually accelerate that pace of change, because we can redirect some of that into that transition piece. But what we're also calling for really, really clearly is a regional energy upgrade incentive. So realistically, we want to make sure that we're building out the frameworks. We also would like to see the public finance institutions that are in place at the moment to be supported to prioritise regionally relevant technologies. I know there is a question there as well around fast charging technology in the bush, and absolutely, it really varies by state, but at the moment there are some pretty significant gaps. The WA Wheat Belt is certainly one of them at this point in time, and Ray, you might speak briefly on that because I know you've done significant work in this area as well. But getting the policy and the financial frameworks right, making sure that as a community and as a nation, when we are looking at our federal budget priorities, we're actually using that federal budget to be able to build out the infrastructure for the future to increase Australia's energy sovereignty, to support our rural and regional areas, and of course to make sure that we're really secure as we look into the long term and reducing our diesel dependence over time. So it's all about unlocking that technology, using that flywheel to be able to make sure that we're heading in a direction that makes us more energy secure for the long term.
Excellent. Thank you, Verity. Now, I am going to move us along because everyone has lunch to eat. And I'm going to encourage you all that if there are other questions that you have, someone's popped in the chat to please get in touch with the Farmers for Climate Action team using info@farmersforclimateaction.org.au. I'd like to, maybe before I move on, I'd like to everyone to give a clap on mute for all of our presenters today who have been so critical in bringing this work to life and really enabling FCA to play a critical role going forward. And I would like to encourage, if there is anyone on the line who is interested, who is a farmer, who's living regionally, who wants to be more involved in what the next steps of this piece of work are on an advocacy front. On Tuesday, the 23rd of June at 12:30, we'll be running another event for our community. It will be a similar online discussion like this, but we'll spend a much shorter time summarizing the results and more on what you can do to help amplify the message and get it in front of the right people who do have their hands on the policy levers. So I'd encourage you all to come along to that. I have a few notes here on how you can help Farmers for Climate Action, but I would really encourage you that we've described this as a policy roadmap, and we're thrilled that it's demonstrated what is possible kind of moving into the future. But it is a roadmap, and it matters that somebody is driving it. We are so excited to be stepping more confidently and in a more focused way into this space. And we really need your support to make it happen. So if it is possible and you can, the discussion today resonated with you, we would be very grateful for a donation to Farmers for Climate Action to back the movement of farmers that is going to make this work real from here into the future. And yeah, thank you again for coming along today. Like I mentioned, we will send around a recording to everyone who couldn't come along. We appreciate your questions, and we will look out for you in next time. So thank you again.